Hi guys. So today I'm just going to film a video talking about my labor and delivery, and also a little bit about the end of my pregnancy. So if you are a subscriber, welcome back. And if you're new here, my name is Becca, and this is my 4.5-week-old baby. Her name is Mabel, and she was born in February. And yeah, I hope you will stick around. So I'm just gonna jump right into it, and yeah, get this story started, and hopefully she'll stay happy this whole time. And hopefully I won't take too long. So I'm gonna start at 40 weeks. I was due January 23rd, and honestly my whole pregnancy I had the feeling that I would go into labor actually early, around the full moon, which was on the 10th. So I thought maybe the week after the 10th of January I would go into labor. Yeah, so that was just the feeling that I had through my pregnancy, that I would go into labor early, which didn't happen. So I was really unprepared emotionally to go overdue, and I was feeling really conflicted because I loved being pregnant. I had a really easy pregnancy. I didn't have any complications or anything like that, and I was just feeling really stressed about being overdue, and really sad, and really wanting to meet my baby, and really frustrated that I wasn't going into labor. And I was trying everything. The only thing I wasn't willing to try was the castor oil, and that's partly my own preference, just knowing like what it does. And I also did ask my midwives, and they didn't recommend it just because it can cause you to have diarrhea your whole labor, and that is really not fun for them, and it's really not fun for you. And so that's just not something that I wanted to put myself through. But we were trying everything else. I mean, sex, I was pumping, I was doing evening primrose oil, orally and vaginally, and I mean, we were walking. I was doing everything in those last couple weeks to not be pregnant anymore. So our due date came and went, and I remember I was really ready to not be pregnant anymore, and I posted on Facebook just asking for some prayer that I would go into labor soon, and just asking people to like just, you know, ask God to put my body into labor and help things go smoothly. And I was really hoping that maybe the weekend after my due date I would go, and then that didn't happen, and then it was the next week, and we had a midwife's appointment on that Monday, I think, or Tuesday, I can't really remember. And they told me that because I was about to be overdue, I needed to have an NST and a biophysical profile. And so that was scheduled for really early in the morning, the day after I turned 41 weeks. So my weeks always changed on a Thursday, so my NST and BPP would be on a Friday. And so because we had care at all of our prenatal care at a birth center and with midwives, and we just decided to pay cash with them because it would have ended up being cheaper that way. But because of that, we would have had to pay for the biophysical profile, which is an ultrasound that they do to check on a few different things when someone's gone overdue. And so, yeah, we had to have that at a hospital, and we would have had to pay cash, like out of pocket, for that, just because of our like payment situation with midwives. And so I was really stressed out because I not that we couldn't pay it, but it's just like, it, you know, it's an extra expense, and I didn't want to have to pay it if we didn't need to, and it would have been a real bummer, like, knowing that she was okay, to have gone and, like, been like, yeah, she's fine, and now you have this big extra bill. So I was really stressed, and I really didn't want to have to do that if we didn't need to, and so, you know, we were still really trying. I was on my ball every day, like, I was doing everything to go into labor, and Thursday came, and I was still pregnant, and I was 41 weeks, and I was really stressed about having to get up in the morning and go to the hospital. And I was also scared that, you know, something would be wrong, and, like, I would have to be induced, and so, yeah, that was just a bummer. But that night, I got in the shower with my husband, and I got really swollen, and so I hadn't had any swelling my whole pregnancy. The only time I'd really gotten swollen was when we drove to Washington, and that's just a really long drive, and so I was sitting in the car for a long time, and that was, like, normal to swell then. So yeah, I got really swollen, and that scared me because I was worried I was having, like, preeclampsia and was gonna have to be induced or, like, transfer my care out of the birth center and have to be induced at the hospital. So I called my midwives, and they told me that it was probably just from being in the hot shower and from standing in the hot shower, and, you know, I was at the end of my pregnancy, and so some swelling is kind of normal, and they wanted me to rest my feet, and so we did that. We went to bed and put my feet up, and the swelling went down, and everything was fine. And a few hours later, that was around maybe 11:30 or midnight, and so we went to bed, and then a few hours later I woke up at around 1:50 a.m. And was having contractions, and I started timing them. It was really early, and I didn't want to wake my husband up, and I'd have, like, some false labor, especially, like, the shower always gave me contractions. Like, I always got really strong contractions in the shower, and then I would get out of the shower and they would go away. So I was kind of like, oh, I don't want to, like, freak out and, like, not be in labor and have everyone awake and then not be in labor. So I didn't wake my husband up for a little while. This is where I'm going to get my notes, because, like, the time starts to get kind of blurry after this. So yeah, so I woke up and was having contractions, and I was timing them, and then I think they were like 7 to 10 minutes apart, maybe like 12 minutes apart max. And so I didn't feel like I was, like, urgently needing to be seen by anyone or have anyone know that I was, like, contracting. So I kind of timed them for an hour and breathed through them, and they definitely felt different. Like, I definitely knew that they were, like, stronger and more consistent than I had ever had previously. So I was kind of, like, thinking I was probably in labor. So then I woke my husband up maybe like an hour and a half later, sometime between 3 and 4 a.m. I woke Gavin up, and I also texted my doula. I think we called the midwives at that point, and they just told us to rest, I believe. But Amanda was talking about maybe coming over, and I'd woken her up, and it was really early, but I decided to text, Amanda's my doula, I think I said that already. But I decided to text her and say, like, let's just try and rest, because I really wanted everyone to be as well rested as possible, and I'm so glad I did that, because our labor ended up being 24 hours. So I'm glad that my instinct was, like, excuse me, just to have everyone to sleep. So we Oh yeah, so I was like really afraid that this wasn't going to be real labor because I just really, really wanted to like have my baby. And so I was like having some fear around it being false labor again. So we were resting, and then Gavin like randomly sang the Men in Black theme song. Like, here comes the Men in Black. And we kind of giggled about that, and then we were like, well, let's watch that movie. Like, we just had this urge to watch a movie, and so we turned on Men in Black, and I was still having contractions. And so we decided to watch that, and we watched it all the way. I watched it like halfway through, and then I fell asleep. And then, yeah, once that was over, we called the birth center. So we called them at 4:23, and I believe Lydia answered the phone. Yes, and she was like my main midwife. And yeah, they just told us to rest until morning, I believe. They wanted to see if I was still contracting in the morning, and then if I was, they would reschedule the BPP. So we kept laboring. I believe I just like stayed in bed and labored and fell asleep for a little while, and the contractions got slower, so they were like 7 minutes apart, and then they spaced out more to like 15 minutes apart, 12 to 15 minutes apart. And then Gavin called the birth center again at 6:30, and so because I was still contracting that morning, they decided to reschedule from, I think I had to be there at like 8:40. They decided to reschedule the ultrasound at the hospital for 3:30 in the afternoon. So, yeah, so I was still contracting. Basically, they still wanted me to go because I could be in labor for a long time. So, yeah. So we still were resting, and then around 9, I got up and had eggs. Gavin cooked them for me. And as soon as I got up, my contractions got closer together. So as soon as I was awake and like not resting anymore, my contractions went back to 7 minutes apart. And so at that point, I decided I wanted to get up for the day, and probably around 9:30 or 10, I got up and curled my hair and put makeup on. And for some reason, that was just my plan from the get-go, was like, when I go into labor, I'm gonna put her in her little pillow. When I go into labor, I'm going to curl my hair and just like get pretty so that I feel good. And also because we were having pictures taken during the labor, I like wanted to look nice in the pictures. That did not work out. Like, I ended up in the shower and with my hair wet, so my hair wasn't curled in the pictures, and I had makeup like literally all over. I would have been better off just not having mascara on. So just like a note for next time, or like for you mamas out there who might be preparing for labor, get waterproof mascara, or just don't even bother because it's gonna be everywhere. So yeah, and I was like listening to some like rap music and like girl power music that I had prepared for labor, and was just kind of like powering through contractions and just like feeling myself and getting in the zone. And we were just kind of like having a good morning, and I felt really good. I was at that point I was like excited to be in labor and just in a really good mood and happy that that was the day I was going to meet my baby, and I was so glad that I was in labor. Yeah, so I did that to kind of distract myself, and yeah, it had been in my mind to like do that for a few weeks, so that's what I did. Then I got dressed, and I decided to bounce on my yoga ball in my room, and at some point during that, our midwife came, or not our midwife, our doula came to hang out, and she just kind of like, you know, hung out, like kind of suggested different positions, and yeah, she was just kind of there for conversation and for support at that point. She came in while I was on the ball, and I remember her mentioning to Gavin, like, oh, doesn't she look so pretty for someone who's about to have a baby? And that was really sweet, and just like a memory that I had. And Gavin had been up with me pretty much all morning, so at that point I wanted him to rest again if he could. And I bounced on the ball in here and like labored on my hands and knees in here while he was resting. And he did end up falling asleep, I think, for a little bit, but not very long. And at some point I left the bedroom and walked around our kitchen, and I think I ate like a banana or something, and was talking to my doula, and then my father-in-law came in and I talked with him for like a brief second. And then right after that, Gavin woke up and we all decided to go on a walk. And so we were still timing contractions at this point. And they were pretty consistent. Okay. So we decided to go on a walk just to see if that would like increase the intensity of things. I was like breathing through them and like needing to stop, but still happy and like conversating between contractions. For like half an hour, we walked around the neighborhood, and that made my contractions like really, really short, but really frequent. So they were like 2 minutes apart, but like only 30 seconds, and they weren't very strong when I was walking around. And that was really weird because I thought that contractions were supposed to like get more intense with walking, and like that's supposed to kind of help labor progress. And what I think those rapid fire contractions did was help me dilate, maybe. I don't know. I will go back and say that at our appointment, at our like 39-week and a few days appointment, I was 1 centimeter like barely a centimeter dilated, and 70% effaced. And then at our almost 41-week appointment, I was 2 centimeters dilated and 80% effaced. And so I wasn't super dilated. So I think I was just like slowly dilating through that morning. Let me look at my notes. So we were walking around. This had to be like in the afternoon. We were getting close to like needing to leave for our BPP and get to the hospital. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. Okay, so at this point it was starting to get close to when we were needing to leave for the hospital. And when we got back, I was feeling kind of discouraged because my contractions had gotten so like weird while we were walking around, and my midwife suggested that maybe I should get into the shower because that always helped me have strong contractions before. And I was kind of scared to get back in the shower because I had swollen the night before, but in the end we just decided to try it. And it ended up being fine, and I started having really intense contractions in the shower, like real, like, oh, this is painful, this is like really uncomfortable, and I needed to focus through them contractions. And I wasn't timing them because I was showering, but then eventually Gavin came into the bathroom and he started timing them, and I remember like just trying to figure out ways to like get through them, like different positions to stand in the shower while I was having contractions. And at one point I tried squatting, and that brought on the most holy moly rock your world contraction that I had had all day, and it was really intense. It was the most intense contraction I'd had up until that point. And so Gavin decided to call the midwives again and just tell them, like, I was having really strong contractions, like vocalizing through the contractions, and he really felt like it was time for us to be there at the birth center. Nice. So the problem with that was we were also like cutting it close where we needed to be at our ultrasound, and so the midwives decided that we should head to the birth center and I would get checked, and if I was at a point where I could be admitted to the birth center, then they would cancel the BPP, but if not, they still wanted me to go to the hospital. So I got dressed really fast, and I remember just grabbing like some food on the way out the door so that I would have something to eat if I needed to make the baby active for my BPP and NST. And so I grabbed like a protein bar and some apples and bananas. And we loaded up. And then I was like really in labor at that point. And I remember we were like giggling about having to hold the oh shit handle in the car. And also I was like putting my legs and my feet up on the dashboard during contractions because it just felt the most comfortable. And I was worried that someone would see me doing that in the car and think it was weird that I was doing that, or like that I was like having the baby in the car, which was not happening. So we were like laughing, and I just felt really good, even though I was like having really intense contractions at that point. Like I was moaning through the contractions and breathing through them, and they were really uncomfortable, but in between it was fine, and I just was laughing and having a really good time with my husband and our doula. So we got to the birth center. It took an hour. It takes an hour almost exactly to get there from our house, and so at the end of the drive I was really over being in the car. And I would suggest, if you can avoid being an hour away from your birth center or hospital, definitely do that. But you know, that's just how it played out for us, and I would have rather been there anyway. So yeah, so I was really over being in the car, and I had a contraction in the parking lot on my way in. But it was really short, and I remember my midwife being like, are they all like that? And I was like, no, they're not all really short like that. It was like a really brief one. It was weird. And then they checked me, and I was at a 6, and she stretched me to a 7, and I was really happy to hear that. I was also 90% effaced. And so how the birth center works is, usually at a hospital they'll admit you at like 4 centimeters, but at the birth center they want you to be 6 centimeters before they admit you. So I was at a 6, and when Amy checked me, she stretched me to a 7. We were laughing about her taking her time and like waiting till the last minute to do her thing. So yeah, so we got admitted and we got into the room that we wanted. We were the only ones there that day. We were the only ones there, and so they were a little worried about my blood pressure, but I was a little dehydrated, so I had some emergency, and then we decided to go walking again. And so this time we walked around the neighborhood outside of the birth center, and my contractions were, I think, established at that point, and so they didn't get short and erratic. They stayed really consistent and a lot stronger. Like I was, again, like moaning still through these contractions and like had to stop, and like at this point Gavin and I had gotten into like this little groove of like every time I would have a contraction we would stop and I would like wrap my arms around his neck and then just hang off of his body, and he would kind of like support me. And he'd been doing this for hours, and he did it for more hours afterward. So I think Gavin probably held on to me that way for maybe like 16 hours. Maybe not. Maybe closer to 12, but it was a long time. Well, no, maybe it was more like 10 or 12 hours. But anyway, I was just like hanging off of Gavin. And so we did that. We walked around probably for like another half hour, and then I really needed to go to the bathroom, and so we went back in, and I went to the bathroom and I lost some of my mucus plug, and yeah, and so we just labored in the room again, just like in that groove of like getting having a contraction, stopping everything and just hanging off of Gavin and moaning. And then my doula would like massage my back or put a hot rice sack on my back, which was amazing. I wish we would have done that the whole time. It was so awesome. And then we had discussed having a water birth, and so the midwives started to fill up the bathtub for us, and I really wanted to get in. It was so tempting, but they didn't want me to get in until a certain point, and they also needed to like fill it with hot water from the kitchen, because like with pots, because the building is old, so they didn't have enough hot water just from the faucet, and so they were filling it, and I just really wanted to get in. And then finally I could, and I remember I got in by myself. Gavin didn't get in at any point. I think he would have if we had a water birth, but at that point I was just laboring in there, and yeah, and I really expected to love the tub, and it was really relaxing, but I also felt really trapped and confined to that space. It was hard on my knees, and I was just getting really uncomfortable. And then I think also the water was just so like relaxing to my uterus that I really just didn't have very strong contractions in the tub. And I think because of that, the midwives wanted me to get out, and so they wanted me to try some different positions. And yeah, and I think at some point we also did another check, and I was at a 10, and so I could have started pushing pretty early. It was not very long between when we got there and when I was complete, but I didn't feel that urge, and so I wasn't pushing. And so they wanted me to get into some different positions that could make my contractions more intense, and then hopefully I would get the urge to push. And so we tried the toilet, and I labored on there for a little while. And then we got out the squat bar. That really didn't work out for me. And then Lydia, my midwife, discovered that I had a posterior cervical lip, and I wasn't really feeling the urge to push, and the lip was kind of getting in the way of her head, and so she was trying to help lift the lip over her head during contractions, and that was so intense. And like, I was watching my birth video, and I was telling my sister, and I was telling her like contractions weren't really painful, they were just really uncomfortable. Like, it's not pain, it's just a different sensation in your body. But Lydia pushing on the cervical lip and like trying to get that past her head was painful, and so there was it felt like a long amount of time where I was just like contracting against that lip over and over again, and that was painful and also really frustrating and exhausting. And at that point we were trying to push, but I was tensing my butt muscles and my like legs, because those are like my power muscles in my body. I mean, those are just big muscles in anyone's body, but I couldn't figure out how to relax those muscles and support myself and push at the same time. And so I was getting really confused about pushing, and the lip was painful, and so I was getting really frustrated, and I think I just hit a wall and like really just wanted to be done. And so we were moving around and just trying different things, and yeah, it was just really intense. And finally we tried being on my back, which is the last place I would have expected to want to labor or push from. And they got out the rope that you can like pull against, and that wasn't working, and I was just so done. And like, it had been hours of that, it felt like. I don't really know if it was. I think I only pushed for 2 hours, but it felt like it had been like so long of just like pushing, and yeah, it just was like exhausting. I'm trying to see if I have like some notes. No, not really. So yeah, so we'd been like moving around and doing all of this like different stuff, and I'd been contracting for forever and was reaching like 20 hours, 22 hours of labor, and kind of like trying to push and like pushing even though I didn't really feel like I needed to, which wasn't doing anything. And then we got on my back, and the little rope thing didn't really work for me. And so finally I was just done. I was just so over it. I just wanted to be done. I didn't want to be there anymore. And I was really disappointed at that point in myself, because I felt like I wasn't coping, and I also felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. Which was not true. She was like really so close to being born. Like, they kept telling me like she's almost here, like, you know, they told me to like feel her head, and she was like, you know, that far up there. She had, you know, 1.5 inches or maybe 2 inches left to go. So she was really close. But I just was in my head and feeling like I couldn't do it anymore, and I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I looked at everyone and said, I'm leaving. Like, I want to go. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going. And I looked at my husband and said, like, let's go. Like, I'm done. I want to go. I'm leaving. And it's really funny now, but at the time I just really wanted my husband to like look at me and be like, that's fine, let's go across the hospital and you can have an epidural and be done. But that's not what happened, and obviously I was just like really close to being done, and yeah, so I just said that, and like I got up to leave. I was gonna go. I was done. And as soon as I sat up, the urge kicked in, and finally I felt like I had to push. And I don't know what happened like physically. I don't know if her head just got past the lip at that point, or if it was just like maybe the emotion, like just the emotional release of saying like I was done. But somehow that really just triggered the urge to push, and I finally felt that like fetal ejection response in my body, where it was just like she needed to come out, and my body was doing it for me. And that was so satisfying. Oh my gosh, that was the best feeling in the world, to like finally be like, ugh, and like my body just did it for me, and I started really pushing. And so from that point, I was pushing, and they were like holding my legs back with their shoulders, the students in one of the midwives was, I think. And her head, I could see her head starting to come out, and because they put a mirror between my legs, and so we were watching her head come out, and I was even then still like kind of cracking jokes in between pushes, and it was intense. Like, pushing was really intense, and I was saying ow, but I don't remember it as pain anymore. And I don't think like pushing, I think pushing was great. It was awesome to like actually see progress. I think that visual was really, really important to me, like mentally, to just see that I was doing it and like getting something done and like doing the work. And so that was awesome. And then the Ring of Fire happened, and that was less intense than I expected it to be. It burned, but it was just so brief that it was okay. And I had a lot of support. Like, the midwives were supporting all of my tissue, so that was great. And yeah, they just directed me on how to push, and I pushed with my body, and her head came out, and she didn't have any cord around her neck, and then her shoulders hurt. I remember her shoulders being more painful to push out than her head, and then she was on my chest, and I was in shock. Like, it was unbelievable, and I kept being like, oh my god, and it didn't feel real that I had just done that and that she was there. And I didn't cry because I was just so, I think, relieved to be done. But yeah, it was just amazing, and I was so relieved that she was out. And she'd been kind of slow to move through my birth canal, so she took a little while to cry, but nothing crazy, and they just kind of suctioned her out. And yeah, she had some coning on her head just from sitting in my birth canal for so long. But yeah, it was so crazy. And then from there, we just looked at her and talked to her, and she started crying, and that was great. And then I told them I wanted to sit up, so I sat up for a little while. I don't know why I wanted to sit up. I think I was just tired of being on my back. But then I needed to, like, deliver the placenta, so they did that. They thought it was stuck for a little while, but it ended up coming out fine. Everything was fine. It came out with one really big clot. And very little blood. I didn't lose a lot of blood. And we looked at the cord, and I looked at the placenta because I just was really interested. I just wanted to see it because I think they're cool. And everything came out in one piece. It looked great. I remember the placenta, I didn't have contractions to push it out, but it burned when it came out, which was weird, and I wasn't expecting that. But it did burn a little bit. But obviously it doesn't really feel that bad because it doesn't have bones. It's just like this globby thing. And so after that, we turned, because I was laying on, like, sideways on the bed, and so we turned around so I could lay against the pillows. And then she nursed. She latched right away. Her nursing looked great at that point. Like, right after birth, she had a really good latch, and everything looked awesome. And we just kind of snuggled with her for a little bit, and then they let Gavin take her, and I got cleaned up. Gavin cut the cord. I forgot to say that. Gavin got to cut her cord, and we have pictures of that. They are a little graphic, so they'll just be for us, probably. And so, yeah. And so they let Gavin take her and hold her, and I got cleaned up a little bit. Excuse me. And then our midwives made us breakfast, and they made us this incredible bacon. I've never had bacon taste so good in my whole life. And eggs and some fruit and juice. And we ate that, and then we did her newborn exam, and she was perfect. And you know, they just checked her out and weighed her, and yeah, it was just like the most amazing day ever. And I could go back and do it all over again. I can't wait to give birth again. And then we just got all cleaned up and got dressed, and they did our discharge stuff, and we went home. And it was so hard. And I think, like, right after birth, for a little while, I was, like, feeling a little discouraged, because I think mentally I was not as prepared for, labor as I would have liked to been, just with like the getting over it and like giving the midwives a hard time because I'd been laboring for so long, and like I was discouraged by my confusion when it came to pushing. So I just had a really hard time like pushing without the urge to push, like being directed to push, and so that was a little discouraging to me, but that feeling went away within hours, and I was really after that really happy with my birth experience, and I'm still really happy with my birth experience. I just, yeah, it was just everything I could have imagined, and like the relief you feel when you're done is so amazing, and seeing your baby for the first time is crazy. Like, it's just a crazy experience and a crazy feeling, and it still feels crazy that she's here and that she's real, and yeah, it's like trippy. It's so weird, and she's been here a month. She's a month old now, so I don't know if that feeling ever goes away, that you made a person. But yeah, but that was my birth experience, and then I'm gonna film another video right after this on her and I in like the first month, so I won't go into details too much about postpartum, but physically I had no tearing. I was just very, very swollen down there. My urethra was so swollen that they actually had to hold it out of the way while I was pushing, so that's crazy. But other than swelling and like I think one minor abrasion, I'm pretty much fine down there, and now a month out I feel completely fine. My bleeding is mostly gone. It comes and goes. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just been crazy, and I am in love with my birth experience and just how everything went. So that is my birth story, and I know it was super long. I don't know how many people will watch this, but if you're a new mama or a soon-to-be mama, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you feel as empowered by your birth experience as I did, and if you don't, reach out, or you know, there are people that you can talk to help guide you and help you heal from any trauma you might have experienced. And even if you did have a great birth experience, like, talk it out and keep sharing it. And I hope I never stop sharing my birth experience and like for future experiences, because I think they're really important, and I think they're really helpful for other people who are going to go through it, just to like know the different range of like what a good birth experience can be. Because I think you can have a cesarean and have a great birth experience, and a medicated birth in the hospital and have a great birth experience. Like, it's different for everyone. So what was great for me might not work for you, and that's fine. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below if you want to. I really want to connect with you guys and keep growing here on YouTube. So yeah, I don't know how that's going to work with their new rules or whatever, but I'm just gonna keep making videos, and hopefully someone out there likes them. But I will see you guys in the next one.